this is a marathon recovery. It's going to take a while. The government's going to do their part, but there's going to be a lot of grassroots support. It's going to take a lot of people contributing $20, right? There's so many places, small pockets with small groups of people that are totally unreached and don't even have a established helicopter landing zone. So we needed small private aircraft to be able to go in and go land and establish contact, bring materials, drop off people to go do search and rescue. So it was a very unique effort.
Hello, Frank, and welcome to Up Your Tile Game podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
Sure. Glad to be here, Christy.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background, and your company.
Sure. Best Tile is a ceramic tile and stone distributor. We've got a bunch of locations along the East Coast of the United States. We go from Burlington, Vermont down to the Carolinas. We're a third generation family owned company and been at this for a while. So since 1956, I personally have been with the company for 34 years. Yeah, it's a really good, solid, traditional tile distribution business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was checking out your website and I saw a bit about that history and just how they got going. How about yourself? How did you, because I see that you've got a background in tile, how did you get interested and get started in the first place?
Well, I was brought in for a management role during a downturn in the late 80s where they needed someone to come in and sort of revamp the organization after many years of explosive growth. So that was the connection originally. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So at that point, you were kind of new to the industry. How was that for you?
I was brand new to the industry. Yeah. They specifically wanted someone without industry background. They were looking for it more from a management leadership background, and I had a military background, and that seemed to appeal to Brad Marcus, who was one of the second generation. He's the one who originally hired me, and he was literally looking for a clean slate, but more of like core characteristics, and then he could build on that how he wanted the leadership team to look going forward.
Gosh, that's such a cool idea. And it's just an interesting way of thinking about it. Because really, honestly, you could probably, it's almost like what you're saying, having that core foundation is almost more important. You can teach anybody different industries, right? So it's
Right.
having that foundation. I noticed that you were in the Army Special Forces.
Correct.
For
Correct.
what, 17 years? Is that what it was?
Not that long. Really,
Okay.
out of my total time of service, a lot of which was reserve time and some IRR time. So my total time looks longer than the time I served, but about 8 years in the special operations environment.
How did you decide to go into the Army?
Originally, I was just going in out of high school, and I was coming from a place where, opportunity was not certain. It wasn't presented to me, so that was a good choice. And then I really didn't know what I was doing when I went in. I picked a role that seemed like I was a good fit for it. And then I wound up being recruited into officer candidate school, and after that, that's when I shifted my career into the special operations environment.
So imagine just those qualities that you had just parlayed right into this management position with Best Tile.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that's what Brad was after. He was looking at a core set of attributes, that had to do with work ethic, leadership. There's sort of there's two mindsets there with management and leadership, right? And being in distribution, it's kind of you manage things and you lead people. It's sort of the concept. And so I think that fits well because we do manage a lot of things in distribution. It's not purely the leadership role, but you have to have both sides of the equation. And that was really, I think, a great fit I had a big learning curve. I was adapting to when you're coming out of a special operations environment and you're working with really high performance individuals that have a high training level. Um, there's a significant shift where the expectations change. You have to provide a lot more training. You have to look at, what people's capabilities are and try to adapt them to roles. But, ultimately, I feel like it worked out pretty well.
I bet. It's that you've been in the industry now for like 34 years, right?
It's been a wonderful industry. I really like the fact that it was really a sustainable product. And I mean, we use that word now, but I grew up in an area where there was a lot of value placed on tile. And, people looked at that for longevity. It was an investment in their home. So I always had that sort of a perspective on the product itself. And I didn't want to be involved in an industry that was going to have a short lifespan.
It's very, what I've understood or come to know is working with tile, there's a lot of precision involved. So that's very fascinating to me because it's important.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of technical side to ensuring that the structure will last. The product is capable of lasting thousands of years from what we see from installations in Europe. But it's just that we're integrating them in structures in the US that are not necessarily at the same level of performance. And so, the technical component generally applies to the substructure, and then the artisan nature of accomplishing the work. You can have a beautiful piece of product, but you must have labor that is capable of taking the time and doing the layout and creating that beautiful installation through their artisan abilities.
Exactly. It's like an artisan / technician. You can't not just, be one or the other, which is really fascinating
Exactly.
to me. So Kurt was telling us, he said, talk about upping your tile game. You've got to talk to Frank Donahue about doing what he's doing up in North Carolina in this, assistance and relief for Hurricane Helene and what all it's done up there. Can you tell us a little bit
Sure.
about how you got involved and your experience with this so far?
So I've been involved in utilizing my military skill set. I've continued to do search and rescue and disaster relief work through a couple of organizations. The Civil Air Patrol, we do air and ground search and rescue, as well as disaster relief. But most of what I've been involved in has been through an organization called Operation Airdrop, which was launched during Hurricane Harvey in Texas, where there were areas unreached and they had fixed wing aircraft. I'm also a pilot, so we do a lot of aviation related activities, and I had participated in Operation Airdrop during Hurricane Florence that was run out of the Raleigh-Durham airport. And we provided similar relief for the coastal region that was inundated with flooding. So I had kept up with those guys, and I'd been tracking them for various storms that they have dispatched now for, I think, 15 events.
Wow.
And when this one hit, I knew they were deploying, and so I was kind of tracking with them. And then I wound up corresponding with them, and they were like, yeah, if you can come up, that'd be great. So I wound up deploying and going to Hickory, where they had established a helicopter base, which was unique because in the past we had used just fixed wing operations. There might have been some helicopters involved on a very limited basis, but it was mostly fixed wing operations. And this environment demanded primarily helicopter operations in more remote places. There were airports that were open, and their fixed wing operations were deploying from a different base into those. So both were going simultaneously. But the Hickory rotary wing base was a huge piece of the puzzle. There's so many places, small pockets with small groups of people that are totally unreached and don't even have a established helicopter landing zone. So we needed small private aircraft to be able to go in and go land and establish contact, bring materials, drop off people to go do search and rescue. So it was a very unique effort.
Wow, it sounds like it. I mean, I was just visualizing as you were talking about that. Just as mountainous as it is there in Asheville and that whole area that got hit so badly. Is it easy for you to find a place to land? Do you guys like sometimes have to take an open field or a piece of road, or how do you do that?
There was a lot of landings that were in baseball fields, soccer fields, roadways, very non-standard helicopter landing zones. So yeah, there was some that were, and then some places where they couldn't land. They could get in, but they couldn't get back out, so they had to,
Uh,
kind of shift out. I mean, there's some very, very remote areas, and basically what happens is everybody's familiar with the larger towns, such as Asheville. And as you move out of Asheville into, smaller towns and smaller towns, you get into unincorporated areas, and they only have like a community center and maybe a volunteer fire department. They don't have an established helicopter landing zone. So you're going in, landing in a field, establishing contact with
mm,
whoever's in charge, providing for disaster relief, which is not necessarily a professional role for them. They might be an employee of the municipality, or not, school teacher or whatever. Most of the contacts I got were actually through my tile industry affiliations. I would say almost exclusively.
that's interesting how that worked out.
We had some folks that lived in the area. Our Stone Peak representative lives in Asheville. That young lady escaped at the height of the storm
Wow.
and went through some difficult circumstances. And she was reaching back out to her friends, and they were putting me in touch with the points of contact in a lot of these outlying areas that were not being serviced. So we were able to quickly connect the dots. We had a way of deploying, whether in some cases by ground, in some cases by air. But we had resources that they needed, and we had to have a point of contact. We can't just go somewhere without a point of contact. And
Because it's
so
almost like it would be fruitless if you can't get what you
it
brought
is.
there to someone who needs it, right?
Correct. And you don't know where it's going to go. I mean, we're talking about brand new generators and chainsaws and all these things. We need to make sure that those assets get in the hands of people who need them, and that they, are going to be used initially. You're not trying to benefit an individual. You're trying to benefit a community. So you
Hmm.
need someone with authority to control those so that they're being allocated out to the people that, to scenarios where they meet the most need.
Yes, that makes so much sense. So how many of these trips have you been doing since you got involved with this on this particular hurricane issue
So,
with
just to be
Helene?
clear, I was not flying those missions. I was
Mm-hmm.
helping run the flight line, getting
I
those
see.
deployed. Um, the numbers were staggering. There were, I want to say, several thousand individual flights with as much as 2 million pounds of material, and that would
Gosh.
not include deployments of, there were personnel deployments where they were extracting. I believe the number was around 400 evacuees by private helicopter. Once the military showed up, we could shift to the larger military helicopters for evacuations, but the inbound supply, and sometimes it's the same flight. You might bring supplies in and evacuate people on the same flight. But
Mm-hmm.
roughly, it was in the low 2000s for mission sorties, and the amount of weight of delivery was over 2 million pounds. Keep in
Wow.
mind, most of the aircraft that we're talking about, depending on the crew on board, you're delivering between 450 and 800 pounds at a time.
So that's a lot of flights to be able
That's
to
a
get up
lot
to
of
two
flights.
million. Yes,
Yep,
absolutely.
just cycling all day long. And then as the military began to send in resources, they integrated into our base, and we
Hmm.
actually provided supplies for them, loaded them, Blackhawks, Chinooks, and we got them. We sort of segregated out areas based on safety rules, because the bigger aircraft, they have a wider envelope for safety, so they would take places where they could get in and out of safely, and that they would be more like population centers, places
Hmm.
where they could bring large amounts of generators and things like that into a staging base. And then we continued on with our mission of supplying remote areas with small aircraft. A lot of it was insulin, EpiPens. There was a tremendous need for oxygen bottles. We were actually resupplying. There's a lot of people surviving on oxygen bottles, and when they run out, they have a supply usually on hand. They're refilled on a weekly basis. We were actually cycling helicopters in and out of areas and delivering oxygen bottles, taking the old ones out. And there were volunteer organizations locally in Hickory that were businesses, I should say, that were filling them and allowing us to cycle them back out so people could continue to have oxygen. So things like that, all kinds of needs. Every day we would discover new pockets of people where they were relying on insulin and they were getting at the end of their supply. So we could deploy, even when the roads were open, it would still take 10 to 12 hours to get to these locations by road. We could reach most of the places in our region in about 30 to 40 minutes.
No, that's great. I mean, because when you think about the overwhelming, it's almost like compounding issues, that are happening. It's power, it's water, it's food, it's getting safety. Then you think about people who have medical needs like that, insulin, oxygen, and all of that. It's so compounding. It's overwhelming.
It is, and understanding the terrain and the geography, the way things were wiped out. The roads, first of all, were not very accessible to begin with. If you've traveled up there, it's a lot of switchbacks. Many of the roads are not rated for truck traffic. They're light duty roads, and then add that they had washouts and things like that. So very, very challenging to get ground supply. Some of the washouts, they would just set up traffic bypass. You get one lane, so you'd run traffic in one direction for an hour and then the other direction for an hour. So they were huge challenges on the ground. And then you look at almost all of the houses are in these river valleys, and the amount of washout was just astronomical, right? So these people were very isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these people are isolated in a lot of these, particularly smaller areas. The further away you were from a main highway, the worse off you were.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of how it worked. But I mean, it's really amazing. The road network up there is just very difficult to work with. And adding in the damage to that, there are so many places where you would have a roadway and the river, and then people's properties on the other side of the river. The river might have been a fairly small body of water in most cases, and they would have a small bridge spanning it. But now with the amount of washout, the river is 3 to 5 times the width that it previously was, and the bridge is gone.
That's just astounding. I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen anything like this particular devastation. I can't think of anything.
No. So while it's not like Katrina had very unique challenges. This also has very unique challenges. It's as if a tsunami hit the mountains.
Yeah.
So when they were talking about river rise, from what I understand, in most significant rain events, you might see anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 feet of river rise. This was 30 feet.
That is incredible. I mean, I can't even get my head around that reality. And that's the reason why it's so devastating.
A lot of people are posting pictures of sort of before and after pictures from the same perspective. And that's really the only way I've really been able to comprehend the level of devastation. I mean, and the erosion, the washdown has been enormous. It took, the power system has been taken out. We had a survey crew come back from one area. They were surveying for power restoration, and they needed to understand how many power poles they needed in this one location. And the number was 80 poles. So now you've got an area that you can't easily truck into, and 80 poles is like a couple of truckloads. So unless they're going to start helicopter dispatching poles with heavy lift, which is possible,
Yeah,
it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while for that recovery.
I can
And
imagine. I mean, again, it's just the compounding factors of everything. I don't know how, and I'm not as up to date as I was, probably early on in it, as far as like what's going on and power restoration and all of that so far. But I just, I can't imagine all of that. So it sounds like these organizations that you've been working with, are they going to consistently service, or how is that going to work until, they get to
right.
working, capability, I guess.
So Operation Airdrop is a limited scope operation. So they've
Mm-hmm.
shifted off to an organization called Ground Force, which is a
Mm,
partner. There's a lot of partnerships among uh, the non-government organizations, that are charitable disaster relief. They work well hand in hand with each other. And
mm-hmm.
when something exceeds their capability, they reach out. So when we demobbed from the Hilo base, we basically handed off to Ground Force. But Operation Airdrop is still working because of the unique nature of this. They're still
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep a hand in it. I have shifted to the Benedix Foundation for disaster relief,
Mm-hmm.
and that's another group that I'm actually sitting in the parking lot of their warehouse
Mm-hmm.
right now, where they're collecting and delivering supplies. They're still utilizing fixed wing aircraft. They have a lot of resources, and they will stay at it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's uncertain what the future looks like, but the groundswell of support will go away at some point, and these organizations are prepared to stay in for much longer. This is going to take a really long time.
Years, do you think? Do you think it's
Yeah.
going to be years?
Oh yeah. So right now they're loading up a truck to ship into Daltile in Asheville,
Mm-hmm.
and Horizon Tile in Asheville. Like I said, we're using our network from our industry affiliations, and those partners are helping to redistribute through largely tile contractors in the area who are taking time to reach out. They're people who live in the area, and then they're sort of rallying folks from out of town to come in and help them. And then
Mm-hmm.
they're taking the resources we're providing, and they're extending that into unreached areas or under supported areas, places where they're impoverished, or they're so isolated, they're small pockets. When you think about, relief agencies have to focus on helping the most people at one time, so you're going to have a lot of help in your main pockets, but you need people at the same time reaching out. And that's what the tile contractors in Western North Carolina are doing, part of the Carolina Tile Posse. And these guys are taking time out of work.
Mm-hmm. That's
They've
huge.
got
That's tremendous.
bills to pay. Yeah, and they're doing it because there's a need. And so, and again, the network within the tile industry is a lot of. One of the contacts I have from one of the most remote areas was I got through Jeremy Barker, and he attended a Schluter class with a guy
Mm.
named Wes. And so when the storm hit, he reached out to Wes and to check on him. And Wes said, "Well, I'm doing okay, but I have a friend that works with me who is deep in the Silo Valley, and these guys are getting no support, and they
Mm.
don't really have resources." So he gave me his contact, and we reached out to him. And honestly, it took that guy a little while to understand that it was that we were there to help, because they were blind to the outside world. They did not know that
Wow.
these resources were amassed, and he couldn't understand that a helicopter was going to come for free and bring free stuff to help them out. It just was unfathomable to him, probably still battling a little shock at that point too.
Yeah.
And once we got some material out to him, he became a very key player in the restoration of his area. He was out, wiring generators for people. There's a lot of people out there that are not mobile. They can't care for themselves. They can't get out. So, he was out making sure that their needs were met. And this is all through the tile industry.
That is incredible. Wow. I love hearing that. That says something right there. I mean, as far as like the whole area that you've seen, like what kind of square mile radius has been affected, like hard hit with this?
Well, it's really the entire Appalachian chain in
Mm,
North Carolina, really
mm,
from the southern border to the tip, except it didn't really hit the tail that extends way out, towards Chattanooga, that area.
Okay.
It was sort of weird how that area escaped really significant impact, but it was only that. Otherwise, it's the entirety um, of the Blue Ridge Parkway, right?
That's
It's everywhere.
wow. So for you, having done this before, would you say this is more devastating than, say, for example, Katrina or Harvey?
I can't really compare it. I just think that the unique nature of it makes it far more challenging. Like,
Yeah.
I think the easiest comparison is a place like Katrina, where we had a city that was below sea level, and we had Lake Pontchartrain was compromised. And so it was very hard to get in and out of there with support because of the bayous and the limited highways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it had its own unique challenges, and in no way is this event um, similar to that, other than to say it also has unique challenges. The
Yeah.
roadways and the areas that are compromised, the road surfaces that are compromised are challenging. The
Yeah.
mudslides, um, the isolated communities. Again, the way they work up there, they basically establish living quarters adjacent to the river valley. Is where
Ah.
you're going to put your houses near the river, right? The roads next
Yeah.
to the river, the railroad tracks next to the river. So everybody, by and large, is vulnerable, and their network is compromised because it was a flood event. So naturally, that did the most damage to the areas adjacent to the rivers.
Incredible. What would your message be to people that are going to see this video, as far as like what they could do to be supportive, along with like the way, like you're saying, the tile industry, the way they're collecting around it? And if you want to like say some of the names of the folks that are contributing and how we can help if anybody sees this.
Sure. I would say that there the opportunity, there's going to be, this is a marathon recovery. It's going to take a while. The government's going to do their part, but there's going to be a lot of grassroots support. It's going to take a lot of people contributing $20, right?
Mm.
To build up a mass for. There are people out there that are uh, and I can furnish you the links to the GoFundMe pages that some of these
Yes.
folks are working with. Mike Maness is a big player in this. Jeremy Barker. Mike's got a brother who has a food truck. He's been feeding people literally
Mm.
for free since the rain stopped.
Incredible.
There's a number of people out there that are going to have grassroots efforts, and they're going to need support. And then other organizations like the Benedix Foundation,
Hmm.
and they're looking at long-term solutions. So they're looking at tents that are capable of sustaining over winter. There are tents in this category and that you can heat and people can survive even in mountain environments, but they're very expensive. So they're asking for groups to come together to provide large amounts of funding so they can buy a group of these tents, furnishing them to an area so that the people that need to stay in their area or on their land can do so safely through the winter. So that would be the big thing, is to stay in touch with the organizations. Samaritan's Purse is probably
Hmm.
the biggest player out there. They're based in Boone. They're a
Hmm.
world-class organization, and they were really first boots on the ground. They deployed with oxygen tents immediately for people that sustain on oxygen. There's nobody even close to their performance level in this game.
That's incredible. That's Franklin Graham, right? Billy
That
Graham's
is
son.
Franklin Graham.
Hmm.
So Franklin Graham saw what we were doing and called over and offered us free fuel to support
Wow.
us in the middle of this. Right. So
I love hearing all of this, because honestly, we don't get to hear all of this through just regular news reports. If we get
yeah,
these, this kind of very personalized information is so helpful. And like you said, you'll provide those links and I can post them up so that people can contribute and know where it's going.
sure. And then there's a lot of people out there who there's been a lot of conspiracy theory stuff going on, and
Hmm.
it's not been helpful at all. And I'm not here to defend the government. I'm not here to refute any particular circumstance, because those certain things do happen. But I will
Mm-hmm.
say, by and large, the government's been involved. Whether it was, I can tell you, the FAA was on site every day working with us, making sure that we could operate safely. FEMA representatives did come to see. They have their own thing, and they run a little slower, a little later in the game, but they wanted to see what we were doing. They were very complimentary of our operation. The North Carolina National Guard, South Carolina National Guard,
Mm-hmm.
Connecticut National Guard. We
Wow.
were providing supplies through them. There have been all sorts of organizations. The state fire marshal himself personally was in our base, so not a representative. He was there, and he was flying out to remote areas where, like I said, in an unincorporated area, the only person you have is a volunteer fire captain, not necessarily even a chief, right? And so he was flying out and meeting face to face with those guys and seeing what their needs are and trying to meet them. So, that's really the thing, is that there's so much criticism going on, and it's just not helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can save that for later, but let's just try to help everybody right now. People
Exactly.
are out there, they're doing the job as best they can. This is challenging. There's no way that the government is really equipped to handle this level of flooding in a mountainous environment very quickly. Eventually they'll figure it out, but it's just going to be locals, people with equipment in the area, grassroots organizations, and just people helping people.
It makes sense because it just seems so unprecedented in the sense of like, no one thinks that you're going to. I mean, we've had the after effects, of course, we're in Georgia, of just, hurricanes coming up and affecting us. No one really expects for that to have such a magnitude of impact like it did this time. So, yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, it is certainly unprecedented. You have sharply rising terrain. You have all of the valley floor occupied, and the amount of water that happened in such a short period of time is overwhelming. And like I said, with the road network being compromised and already being challenging to start with, this is going to be really hard. And the government really needs some big, wide open areas to do their work, to set up camps and that kind of stuff. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
going to be easy to do either. I mean, this is really a hard, challenging environment to operate in. And then isolated pockets of very independent people. That's also a challenge. There are a lot of free spirits living in that area.
Well, I applaud you in everything that you guys are doing, everyone you're connected with, all these different organizations you've mentioned. And I'm really excited that we get to share this information and, just keep the help coming in. Cause like you said, it's going to be a while.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful to Kurt, the tile doctor, and you for helping get the word out on this.
Absolutely. Kurt has always said, since it's called Up Your Tile Game, and this is up in the tile game here, just everybody banding together like you're talking about, and just, you know, just attacking this problem. But what would you say, about upping your tile game? What does it feel like to you? And have you seen it demonstrated by this collective of people in the community?
I would say the big thing is I would say that the tile industry, sometimes it feels fairly large, as a national and international group, but it's a fairly small group of people who get along really well and have
Mm-hmm.
a great a product in common that has a long history. And I think there's just a uniqueness to our industry that has been so beneficial, because I could really rely on people who are, at other times they're competitors, they're healthy competitors,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not necessarily, we're not close friends, but in this circumstance, I could trust and rely on them, and they could not be more willing to help.
Mm.
And our alliance was based on our relationship through the tile industry. I don't really have a good explanation for why this is, but I do know that our industry is very tight knit, and especially in situations like this where there is a common circumstance that we have to rally together.
This is like my fifth interview so far because we're still fairly new. But literally, so many people have said that. There's some sort of like uniting thing that they've noticed in this industry. So that's, you're just echoing the same thing, which is really incredible and really amping it up because of what you guys are accomplishing there. So
Yeah,
awesome.
no, it's really amazing. And again, I really have no explanation for it. I've tried to put my finger on it, but I really don't have a good grasp of it.
Hi, that's very interesting. And there's something about the integrity. I spoke to Bill Greasy of the TCNA, and just hearing a little bit, and I'm learning again. It's just something about the integrity. It's the product, it's the attitude, it's the work ethic, as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, and it's been all across the board. So I work with people in standards development, and those they're across the whole spectrum of manufacturers,
Hmm.
distributors, trade associations, all of that, and everyone gets along so well. In fact, I had to access some state level resources in North Carolina during this event,
Hmm.
and I was able to make a call to Niall Watford from New Style, and Niall's kind of a big deal around here. So I needed to get pushed up the chain to get some resources from the state government, and in a matter of hours, Niall had me connected to the right
Wow,
people. I mean, just incredible, and he just, I mean, could not be more willing to help.
that's amazing. I love to hear those stories. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
All right,
I'll
no
let you get
problem.
back at
See
it.
ya.
I know you're a busy
Thank
man.
you.
Bye
All right,
bye.
bye bye.